The first thing you hear isn't the roar of engines, but the rhythmic clack of thousands of wooden sandals, geta, striking the packed earth and the timber clanks of the bridges. The air doesn't carry that scent of hot asphalt or exhaust fumes. It smells of fresh cedar wood, charcoal smoke drifting from kitchens, and the salt spray rising from Tokyo Bay. Welcome to Edo. But this isn't the Tokyo you know, with its neon LED screens in Shibuya and sleek bullet trains. We are in a time where the pace of life was dictated by the tides and the sun. If you stood exactly where the financial district of Nihonbashi sits today, you wouldn't see concrete overpasses choking the sky. You'd see the sun dancing directly on the canal waters, and in the distance, with no skyscrapers to block the view, the colossal white-capped silhouette of Mount Fuji. It looks so close you feel like you could walk to it before dinner. The Nihonbashi Bridge is our starting point. Back then, it was the center of Japan. Literally. All 5 of the empire's great highways converged right here. Imagine the organized chaos. Merchants shouting the prices of daikon radishes, samurai walking with a posture that demands both respect and distance, and messengers running nearly naked with only a loincloth tied at the waist, carrying urgent news from distant provinces. Unlike today, where Nihonbashi is surrounded by bank headquarters and mirrored glass towers, in the Edo of 2 centuries ago, this was the kingdom of the common people. Boats arrived heavy with rice, the actual currency of the time, and barrels of sake. The canal was a liquid highway. If modern Tokyo prides itself on its impeccable, punctual subway, classic Edo took pride in its canals. It was a Venice of the East, but built of wood and discipline. If you looked toward the horizon, the shogun's castle dominated everything. Where the emperor now lives in a silent, verdant retreat in the heart of the city, there once stood the largest fortress in the world. But the most interesting part wasn't just the castle, it was how the city organized itself around it like a spiral. Edo's geography was a rigorous social map. The samurai lived on the high ground, protecting the castle. They weren't just warriors, they were bureaucrats, poets, and sometimes impoverished men trying to maintain appearances in a world that was changing way too fast. Meanwhile, the lower class, the chonin, the townspeople, lived in what we call shitamachi, the lower city. This was where the magic happened. Houses were cramped, made of wood and paper, divided by alleys so narrow you could hear your neighbor sneeze or haggle over the price of fish. It was an intense, noisy communal life. While the modern Japanese person might prize extreme privacy in their high-tech micro-apartments, the resident of Edo lived for the street. The kitchen was communal, the water well was the local gossip hub, and the public baths were the center of the era's social network. Here's a detail that might shock you. Edo was likely the cleanest and most sustainable city in the world during this period. While major European capitals were struggling with terrible waste disposal and disease, in Edo, everything was recycled. Nothing went to waste. There was an entire market for repairing old lanterns, paper umbrellas, and even broken ceramics. But the most impressive part was the sewage system. Human waste was collected, purchased, and transported to nearby farms to serve as fertilizer. Trash was a valuable resource. You know, Edo only became this powerhouse because people decided every detail of that place was worth the effort. If you feel like this kind of deep dive into the soul of cities resonates with you, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Think of it as stamping your passport for our next stop. That way, we make sure the algorithm doesn't leave you out of our next walk through history. It's light, it's quick, and you become part of this group of travelers who prefer an old world map over a modern GPS. But it wasn't all peace and recycling in Edo. There was something the inhabitants called, with a bit of dark humor, the flowers of Edo. It was a poetic name for something terrifying: fires. Since almost everything was made of wood and paper, and houses were literally squeezed against one another, a single spark from a tipped lantern on a windy night could devour 3 entire neighborhoods in a few hours. The Great Fire of Meireki, for example, was so devastating it destroyed more than half the city. But the people of Edo had a staggering resilience. They didn't cry over the ruins for long. They rebuilt with a speed that would put any modern contractor to shame. This shaped the city's character. Tokyo today is a metropolis of concrete and constant mutation, precisely because its ancestors learned that nothing in this world is permanent. If you felt hungry while walking these dirt streets, forget about Michelin-starred restaurants or 24-hour convenience stores. In Edo, if you were in a hurry, you stopped at a street stall, much like a modern-day food truck. It was in this setting of hustle and commerce that nigiri sushi was born. Originally, sushi was a way to preserve fish in fermented rice for months, something with a pungent smell that took a long time to prepare. But the Edo local didn't have time for that. They wanted something fast between a business deal or before heading to a kabuki theater. So vendors started serving slices of fresh fish from the bay over small balls of rice seasoned simply with vinegar. It was the original fast food. And tempura? That was street food too, fried on the spot in sesame oil and served on skewers to be eaten while walking. Imagine the taste of fish caught that very morning, prepared right before your eyes, while a procession of a daimyo, a feudal lord, passed by with hundreds of armed soldiers and colorful banners. That contrast between military luxury and street-level simplicity was exactly what defined the vibe of Edo. When the sun went down, the city didn't light up with mercury lamps. It glowed with the soft, flickering light of thousands of paper lanterns, the chochin. If you wanted fun and art, your destination was Yoshiwara, the entertainment district. This was the so-called ukiyo-e, the floating world, a place where the rigid rules of samurai society dissolved for a few hours. There, if you had the money, the culture, and the manners, it didn't matter if you were a wealthy peasant or a nobleman in disguise. It was the birthplace of fashion, music, and the famous ukiyo-e woodblock prints. Artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige walked these streets, observing people to create works that, centuries later, the whole world would recognize, like the Great Wave off Kanagawa. Today, when you walk through the red light districts of Kabukicho or the tiny bar areas of Shinjuku, you are stepping on the echoes of that floating world. The search for fleeting pleasure and beauty that lasts only one night still pulses in Tokyo's DNA. The transition from Edo to modern Tokyo wasn't a destruction, but an overlay. In the mid-19th century, the shogunate fell and the emperor took control, changing the city's name to Tokyo, the eastern capital. Railroads replaced canals, and brick began to replace wood. But if you look closely at Tokyo today, the scars and paths of Edo are hidden in plain sight. The winding streets that confuse tourists today and don't follow a grid logic actually follow the same paths as the old filled-in canals and the strategic escape routes designed by samurai architects to baffle invaders. The spirit of extreme organization, the almost sacred respect for personal space, even in one of the largest human clusters on the planet, and the obsession with perfection in every small detail of work, all of this was forged in those centuries of isolation and self-sufficiency. When you visit Tokyo today, you aren't just in a high-tech city of glass and metal. You're walking over layers of ash from past fires, over rivers that now run silent under the asphalt, and breathing air that, as much as it has changed, still carries the resilience of a people who learn to flourish in the midst of impermanence. Edo teaches us that a city isn't just made of its buildings, but of the rhythms of the people who live there. The rhythm of Tokyo, as fast and frantic as it seems now, still holds the beat of those old wooden sandals striking the ground at Nihonbashi. Before we head back to the present, think about this. If you could bring just one thing from that old Edo into your life today, what would it be? The absolute sustainability of a zero-waste life, or the quietude of being able to see the horizon without the noise of machinery? Perhaps the next time you look at Tokyo, you won't just see robots and lights, but the shadow of a samurai and the aroma of a sushi stall by the canal. History hasn't left, it's just waiting for you to pay attention.